Hi, I'm Tyler Ferre. This is Crash Course IB History, and today we're going to talk about a topic so big that in today's classrooms we have Jeopardy and Survivor games just to get a tiny sliver of general knowledge in order to pass an extensive paper 2 and get 17 words on a single sheet of paper. This is not Canadian history, but of course something important to the world today, as Canada is only known for making lacrosse sticks. This, of course, is World War II, specifically its causes.
Mr. Ferre, wasn't World War II all Hitler's fault because he got rejected from art school?
Yes and no, me from the past. While Hitler was a failed artist not only in his style of art, but also his choice of a mustache, his actions alone are not the sole cause of the war, but we must also look at the causes credited to Japan's takeover of Asia, how the US may have provoked Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and how the League of Nations failed the world with their so-called collective security. Also, a side note, I've changed a lot since back when I was a student. Took some pills, gained some height, maybe changed in skin color. Nothing I'm concerned. Today's lesson will cover how Europe funded Hitler's little rage fit, but also how the rest of the world could not keep itself from the armed conflict which started every first-person shooter. So here at Crash Course, we like to focus on causes of war rather than strategies and technologies.
Come on, Mr. Ferre, causes of war aren't what create these rage-inducing sleeper-product video games! Take that, helicopter! I will win! I will survive!
It's Ferre, not fair. And wow, I had some interesting fashion choices back then. Yes, myself, while the gory and horrific battles were awesome and heightened both Tom Hanks and Brad Pitt's career as soldiers, if you haven't seen Saving Private Ryan or Ferre, you should go to a video store and educate yourself. However, while battles are pretty cool, we were misguided by Darban in that IB History Paper 2 always has a causes question for a world war. Therefore, we're just going to prepare you to be disappointed and enraged when you open up those Paper 2 prompts. Nevertheless, I digress, and let's move on to Hitler's little baby fit. Before we look at the rise of baby Hitler, we first have to look into the situation he was born into, starting with post-World War I Germany, where it starts to get pretty messy when you start looking into the Treaty of Versailles. After Germany surrendered on the 11th hour, the 11th day, of the 11th month, in 1918, the Treaty of Versailles saw Great Britain and France basically put entire guilt of the war on Germany and billed them 132 million marks reparations. So basically they threw a post-World War I party. Didn't invite Germany, and they expected them to pay for all the presents. So with these giant reparations, Europe saw the quick demise of the German economy to the point where a loaf of bread cost over 200 billion marks. This led to the German people becoming very desperate and falling to the lead of Hitler. And Hitler was very effective in leading because his oratory skills, and this allowed him to gain support of his people very effectively and led to the quick rise of Germany. Sorry, France. Many historians after the war, and still today, believe that Hitler was the greatest cause of World War II. And this can be supported if you study Mein Kampf and the Hossbach Memorandum. And these show that Hitler really did have a monumental role in shaping World War II. But then again, it wasn't all his fault when you look at other countries. One of Hitler's main parts of his plan for a strong Germany was to remilitarize the Rhineland. But at the time, he didn't want a full-scale war. So if Great Britain or France had responded militarily and actually put their foot down, Hitler would most likely conceded and stopped his plans for expansion. But Great Britain and France, of course, did nothing, and so continue on, Mr. Adolf. After the Rhineland, Hitler's war continued on with Anschluss, where the Nazis took over Austria, and the fact that Hitler took Austria without a word from Great Britain or France caused him to easily move on to Czechoslovakia. In World War II, we saw a pretty common theme of countries not being invited to the parties of their interest, and this is seen as Great Britain and France gave up the Sudetenland to Germany without even considering Czechoslovakia. Appeasement is seen as one of the greatest causes of World War II, and historians today condemn it as it allowed Hitler's empire to grow too strong. But others really believe that Europe had no choice and were really acting in their own interests. Hitler's fault or Europe's fault, it all led to Hitler's invasion of Poland and the start of the deadliest event in human history. Now we have successfully looked at Hitler's war, it's time to shift over and go to the Pacific, where the Japanese made quite a mess. The causes for the Pacific War are similar to Hitler's war in that they stem all the way back to the Treaty of Versailles. During World War I, Japan made notable gains in the Far East, taking over German lands, and so during the Treaty of Versailles, they wanted to gain some concessions. But of course, they did not get any, so they left empty-handed and very bitter. This idea of expansionism that led to a very aggressive Japan was supported by the fact that Japan was made of a series of islands that they really needed to expand in order to obtain more resources for those people. I mean, if you look at a map today, you can see how many people they have for what small space. I mean, they literally have to push their people into a subway so they can fit as many people possible. Long-term causes of the Pacific War start with the Sino-Japanese War, which was fought over control of Korea. But the significant part of it was that this was the first time we saw Japan's modern military, with its navy built after the British and its army after the Germans. And also the easy win for Japan only made them become more aggressive and expansionistic. One historian who has been studying World War II international relations for over 30 years has finally deciphered who took over the Japanese army and inspired their expansion and their militaristic actions.
Aliens.
Japan continued its policy of expanding politically and militarily in order to secure raw materials and labor, which led to the Second Sino-Japanese War. At this point, China was backed by the US, and the US responded by enforcing an embargo on oil and iron, which left Japan in a very desperate situation. With no oil coming in now and no oil production of their own, Japan had two choices: either ease off with their expansion and hope the oil embargo would end, or to continue expansion, hoping to seize oil from other countries and further antagonize the West. Therefore, Japan decided to continue to antagonize the West, and with their oil only expected to last about another 6 months, about 5 months later, December 7th on 1941, they attacked Pearl Harbor, a date that will live in infamy. Only 1 day later, the US declared war on Japan, marking a long 4-year campaign of island hopping that would only end with the first use of atomic bombs in any war, and igniting the Cold War. But that's for another day. Historians up till today have still debated on whether the start of the war was Japan's fault or the US's fault. On the Japan side, Japan had been aggressive for decades before, and they did attack the neutral US. But then again, if we look at the US wasn't really neutral, as they supported the Chinese in the Second Sino-Japanese War. And it's pretty clear that by the embargoes they enforced in Japan, they kind of did force Japan to a corner, but didn't really expect them to attack. Looking at both sides, I'm just going to take a neutral stance and say that Canada had no important role in any of these causes, similar to how they have no important role in really anything. Time for the mystery documentary? Alright. The rules here are pretty simple. I read this document and I try not to get shocked when I guess it. Let's see what we got here. The peace, the freedom, and the security of 90% of the population of the world is being jeopardized by the remaining 10%, who are threatening a breakdown of all international order and law. Surely the 90% who want to live in peace under law and in accordance with moral standards that have received almost universal acceptance through the centuries can and must find some way to make their will prevail. This obviously is the quarantine speech delivered by FDR in 1937. Thanks, Karsaka. This quarantine speech was the US's biggest response to the events in Europe, of course before its declaration of war on Nazi Germany, and it was pathetic because not only did it have zero impact on the 10% Germany, Italy, and Japan and their actions, but it also managed to anger the Japanese, Italian, and German Americans inside the country and led to many domestic tensions. Pathetic is the best way to describe US actions against the expanding empires of the world. But I have to remind you that after World War I, we created the League of Nations with Wilson's 14 points. We actually never joined it. The League of Nations was a complete failure, especially when you look at its main purpose, which was collective security. The main reason that the League of Nations was an outright failure was because its main weapon throughout the years was its use of economic sanctions. Yet the most powerful economy in the world, the United States, was not even a part of the League. And the three main crises that defined the failure of the League of Nations were the Ruhr crisis, the Manchurian crisis, and the Abyssinian crisis. In these crises, the League of Nations had zero hold over its members, and therefore the countries did as they pleased. This which led to increased instability in the regions and the eventual outbreak of war in both the Europe and Pacific. Overall, the world was never really impressed by the League of Nations, and we learned from its failures to establish a working international world organization after World War II, which we now know today as NATO. With Hitler greedy for power, Japan's continued aggression, and the League of Nations' inability to reduce tensions between countries, World War I's end really spun quickly into the most covered event in history today. I will not see you next week, as we are done with history forever in school, unless you made the flawed decision to study history in college. Sorry, Darben. This video was produced and edited by Ethan Valdez, Nate Stutzman, and myself, and we have no real connection to Crash Course besides the fact that many of us were saved from exams by their videos. Thanks for watching, and of course, as we say in our history class, America is the greatest country in the world. Nope. Okay, no.
God. Best shot moves the entire desk.
Point when you open up those paper tube bombs.
Plumps.
Nope.
Joke, how much did you say the blow for bread cost?
$2 billion.
I researched it, dude.
Yeah, I literally found a picture and it has 200 billion.
Yep.
What the flip? Like, I have a picture
Okay,
of that.
sorry. For as many peoples. I mean, honestly, they have to shove their people inside subways to get them to fit.
Stupid.
Only one day later, the U.S. declared war on Germany. This obviously is a quarantine speech delivered by... That was a good throw, too.
That was.
In these crises, the League of...
Alright, 21%.
I've been working here for 6 hours with no pay.